Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, an overview of the Dear Lender Letter 2020-06. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. To submit a written question, select All Panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. If you require technical assistance, please send the chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the call over to Krista Johnson, Director of the Office of Loan Guarantee. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention to this Dear Lender Letter 2020-06. This Dear Lender Letter, which I'm sure you've had an opportunity to review, implements the CARES Act for the Section 184 and 184A programs. Jeff Glass is with us today, and he is the Deputy Director of the Office of Loan Guarantee, and he is going to review the mortgagee letter or the Dear Lender Letter with you. All right, thanks everybody. Jeff?
Good morning and good afternoon to those close, and good morning to those on the West Coast. Thank you so much for being here. Just want to take time out today to review the Dear Lender Letter for all of you that are present. Of course, I know we are all in anticipation of the publishing of the Dear Lender Letter, and it was finally published on May 19th. Like I said, we know there was a delay getting it out, and we appreciate you guys' patience with us getting it out. And hopefully, in the interim, we were able to answer any questions you had, because we know, you guys were still working and had to still deal with borrowers, and we had a lot of questions from them. So, thank you again for being patient. Hopefully, you should have had time to review the letter, and I'll go ahead and get going with the review here. Next slide, please. Now, the purpose of the letter is to inform lenders of the special loss mitigation options available to Section 184 and 184A borrowers under the CARES Act, as well as to extend the foreclosure moratorium until June 30th, 2020, and extend out the flexibilities related to appraisals, verification of employment, and IRS transcripts. Next slide, please. Our existing Section 184 program disaster policy is PIH Notice 2015-15. You may be familiar with it, but borrowers impacted by COVID-19 are covered by Dear Lender Letter 2020-06, which we are presenting today, in lieu of the Disaster PIH Notice 2015-15. So what's the difference between the two? The major difference between the two is that Dear Lender Letter 2020-06 provides more flexibilities for people affected by COVID-19, as well as relief only requires the borrower to declare that they are impacted by COVID-19. So only declaration or attestation is required to get relief under the guidance in Dear Lender Letter 2020-06. If a borrower is under a different forbearance plan and has declared that he has been impacted by COVID-19, lenders must convert that borrower to the COVID-19 forbearance. Let me give you an example of that. You may have placed a borrower under a different forbearance plan, maybe even more recently, as well as this information not being out yet with the delay of this information. Know that the major difference is what happens at the end of the forbearance, and I will go into that in detail later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Now let's get into the newly published details of the forbearance for borrowers affected by COVID-19. Of course, there was some guidance issued previously about allowing borrowers to enter into payment forbearance, but there wasn't much detail given. So this is the purpose of this letter, one of the purposes of this Dear Lender letter. So as long as a borrower must first make a request or indicate that they are impacted financially, or their ability to make on-time mortgage payments is impacted due to COVID-19. As such, the borrower may request a forbearance. This request can be made by mail, email, telephone, and it must, again, attest to a financial hardship due to COVID-19. Upon receipt of the borrower's request, the lender must offer the borrower forbearance for borrowers affected by COVID-19. Now, what the forbearance for borrowers affected by COVID-19 allows for 2 periods of reduced or suspended payments without specific repayment terms. Now, those 2 periods, let me just explain how those work. The initial forbearance period must be up to 180 days. So again, it can be up to 180 days. The borrower can decide, but they can be offered forbearance period up to 180 days for the initial forbearance period. So if you have a borrower that was on a forbearance, say for the last 30 days or so because they were impacted, say it was only for 30 days. So the first period could be up to 180 days, and they could accept a period less than that, but they do have the option to have a forbearance for up to 180 days. So that would give them, if they had already been under the forbearance for 30 days prior to this guidance coming out, under this guidance, they can be extended another 150 days. Now, if they reach the end of that, towards the end of that period, they determine that they still are impacted by COVID-19, an immediate additional extension of the forbearance period for up to another 180 days may be requested by the borrower, and the lender must approve it. Lenders must ensure that borrowers fully understand the forbearance guidelines, providing the maximum flexibilities to the borrower. The term of either the initial or the extended forbearance period may be shortened at the borrower's request. Finally, no additional fees, penalties, or interest beyond the amount scheduled or calculated as if the borrower made all contractual payments on time and in full under the terms of the Section 184 or Section 184A mortgage contract during the period that the borrower is on forbearance for borrowers affected by COVID-19. Next slide, please. So forbearance is an option that is communicated in this publication in Dear Lender Letter 2026, more detail on the forbearance. But what happens when the forbearance ends? This is where the loss mitigation advance comes into play. Section 184 borrowers impacted by COVID-19 that receive an initial or extended forbearance for borrowers affected by COVID-19 are excluded from the provisions on forbearance and partial claims that are noted in PIH Notice 2014-11, Paragraph 8, HUD Approved Relief Procedures. The lender must instead evaluate the borrower for COVID-19 forbearance loss mitigation advance prior to the end of the forbearance period. For Section 184A, this Dear Lender Letter establishes new guidance for loss mitigation advances. A COVID-19 National Emergency Forbearance Loss Mitigation Advance under the Section 184 and Section 184A programs is very similar but not identical to a partial claim. For example, a COVID-19 National Emergency Standalone Partial Claim is a form of claim payment under the FHA program, while the COVID-19 National Emergency Forbearance Loss Mitigation Advance is an advance on the loan guarantee under the Section 184 and Section 184A program authorities. Both options ultimately provide the same financial relief to the borrower. Some examples of provisions under PIH Notice 2014-11 that the COVID-19 loss mitigation cases are not subject to financial analysis, property inspection for the property condition, and monthly evaluation of the borrower. Next slide, please. Okay, so the loss mitigation advance under the COVID-19 emergency. Of course, again, borrowers have been allowed to go into forbearance. The Dear Lender Letter 2020-06 was issued on May 19th, giving further guidance on the detail of the forbearance time periods. Again, the two time periods, the first one up to 180 days and the second one up to 180 days. Again, so you have the forbearance, then come the end of the forbearance period, the big question again was always, well, what happens at the end of the forbearance period? And that's where, again, where the loss mitigation advance comes into play. And it is an advance on the guarantee. And I'll get into more detail about that later when I go into the documentation. But again, it will be a promissory note payable to the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it will be secured by a subordinate mortgage on the homeowner's home, the impacted homeowner. Now, as far as eligibility for a COVID-19 National Emergency Forbearance Loss Mitigation Advance, the lender must ensure the following eligibility requirements are met. The mortgage was current or less than 30 days past due as of February 1st, 2020. Now, under Section 184 Forbearance Loss Mitigation Advance, we offer an additional 30 days for our native borrowers in comparison to some of the other programs out there. The borrower has to indicate the ability to resume making on-time payments. Again, we're at the end of the forbearance period, trying to determine how we're going to go forward. The borrower may have had 6 months or even up to a year of suspended or forbeared payments that have stacked up. And this is where this loss mitigation advance comes in. But the borrower has to indicate the ability to resume making on-time payments in order to qualify or be eligible for the loss mitigation advance. And the last eligibility requirement is that the property must be owner-occupied. Now, if the borrower doesn't meet eligibility requirements for the loss mitigation advance, we'll discuss options for that later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So what are the terms of the COVID-19 loss mitigation advance? So lenders, you must ensure that the borrower's accumulated late fees are waived for the entire forbearance period. The COVID-19 forbearance loss mitigation advance includes only arrearages consisting of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. No other charges or fees are allowable. The COVID-19 loss mitigation advance and any prior loss mitigation advances do not exceed 30% of the unpaid principal balance at the date of default that resulted in a previous loss mitigation advance, if any. Or if there was no previous loss mitigation advance, the date of default that led to the COVID-19 forbearance. And we'll go a little bit more into that on the upcoming slides. The loss mitigation advance limit does not change for the life of the mortgage. And the loss mitigation advance limit is calculated as follows. Next slide, please. So the loss mitigation advance is established using the following formula. So again, take the unpaid principal balance at the time of the first default, resulting in a loss mitigation advance. You multiply that by 30%, and that's how you get the loss mitigation advance limit. Just to give you a quick example, say John Doe defaulted September 1st, 2017. His unpaid principal balance at September 1st, 2017 was $100,000. The loss mitigation advance limit, you take the unpaid principal balance at the time that he defaulted on September 1st, 2017, you multiply that by 30%, and you get the $30,000 loss mitigation advance limit. Next slide, please. Now, let's say 2 months after the initial default, say sometime in November 2017, loss mitigation efforts resulted in a $5,000 partial claim or loss mitigation advance to the lender. The COVID-19 loss mitigation advance does not exceed the available loss mitigation advance remaining. The available loss mitigation advance remaining is established using the formula shown here. So again, you take the loss mitigation advance limit. In this example, the loss mitigation advance limit was calculated at $30,000. There was an existing HUD loss mitigation advance lien of $5,000. Deducted from the loss mitigation advance limit, that leaves an available loss mitigation advance of $25,000. So the available loss mitigation advance remaining is $25,000 in this example. And that is the maximum allowable advance authorized under the COVID-19 loss mitigation advance in this particular example. The borrower receives only, again, and also the borrower receives only one COVID-19 national emergency loss mitigation advance for the purposes of a COVID-19 national emergency initial and extended forbearance. So again, there's an initial forbearance and an extended forbearance. But once that forbearance period is over, at the end of both of those forbearance periods, that is when you determine the eligibility for the loss mitigation advance. But there's only one loss mitigation advance per borrower. There's no loss mitigation advance for the first period of the forbearance and then the second period. It's only one at the end of the entirety of the 2 periods if the borrower chooses to forbear for 2 periods. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've identified a borrower that is eligible for loss mitigation advance, and now we will briefly talk about the documents that are required to document loss mitigation advance under the Section 184 COVID-19 National Emergency Forbearance. So what's required? The documents for the Section 184 loss mitigation advance required is a promissory note and a mortgage or deed of trust, and it must include the following: a full case number, any required amendments that are required by the state or federal law or regulations. The note must be executed by the borrower in favor of the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The mortgage must be executed by the borrower. The mortgage or deed of trust must be submitted to the county recorder, Bureau of Indian Affairs, regional or tribal land title recording office for recordation within 5 days of borrower execution. Now, we do have model COVID-19 national emergency forbearance loss mitigation documents, promissory note and subordinate mortgage deed of trust that will be posted on Code Talk. These are model documents that are an example that give you all the required entries. So those will be available on Code Talk either very, very soon, immediately, by the end of this week. We will also send those out to all participants via email. Next slide, please. Just continuing with the documentation requirement. So once these documents are executed, they must be delivered to HUD as follows. The lender must send to HUD the original executed promissory note no later than 60 days from execution, and the original recorded subordinate mortgage or deed of trust no more than 6 months from execution date. Please include a cover letter with the Section 184 case number. Now, lenders must keep the following for their files. And remember that files are always subject to monitoring visits, so you want to keep in your lender file evidence of the receipt date of executed documents from the borrower, evidence of date the mortgage or deed of trust was submitted for recording, and a copy of the executed note and mortgage. Next slide, please. Now, the Section 184A documentation requirement is the same as the Section 184 document requirements with the following exception. For Section 184A, there will be no subordinate mortgage required, okay? The Department of Hawaiian Homelands has restrictions on subordinate mortgages, so this is why there will be no subordinate mortgage for the Section 184A loss mitigation advance promissory note. However, despite those restrictions, HUD wants to be able to provide the same relief for Hawaiian borrowers. Now, even without the recordation of the subordinate mortgage for the Section 184A, the benefits of the loss mitigation advance remain the same. Again, all of the documentation requirements are the same with these exceptions. Next slide, please. Let's talk about reconciliation. You've identified the loss mitigation eligible borrower, documented the loan, you submitted the documents to HUD. Now you are reconciling your loss mitigation advance documentation or your loss mitigation advance amounts. If the lender happens to miscalculate the COVID-19 forbearance loss mitigation advance amount, resulting in an overpayment to the lender must remit the overpayment amount immediately to HUD using www.pay.gov. The lender must indicate the repayment purpose in the comments. Additionally, the lender must send an email to the Section 184 claims at HUD.gov notifying HUD of a payment, including the amount, borrower's last name, and Section 184 or Section 184A case number. In the event the lender claimed less than the actual COVID-19 forbearance loss mitigation advance promissory note amount, the lender must absorb the cost of the miscalculation. Lenders must include the review processes for ensuring the accurate calculation of the loss mitigation advance in the required quality control plan. Next slide, please. Let's briefly speak about some general provisions for loss mitigation for borrowers affected by COVID-19 national emergency. Any Section 184 or 184A borrower who fails to bring their loan current through a COVID-19 loss mitigation advance must be evaluated for the following loss mitigation options. Loan modification, pre-foreclosure sale, deed in lieu or lease in lieu of foreclosure. These compliance with these requirements can be found in PIH Notice 2014-11, paragraph 7, loss mitigation procedures for Section 184 borrowers. Again, for one reason or the other, if the borrower, let's just say the borrower at the end of the forbearance period, it is determined, and the borrower states that they are not able to make their payments going forward. Well, in that case, that makes them not eligible for the loss mitigation advance. And in that case, you would fall back to be in compliance with the requirements in PIH Notice 2014-11, which gives these options, again, the loan modification, pre-foreclosure sale, or deed in lieu or lease in lieu of foreclosure. And of course, if those options don't work out, then you would be subject to the requirements to foreclose on the property according to regulation. HUD also recommends that lenders also follow these procedures for Section 184A borrowers. Next slide, please. Continuing with general provisions for loss mitigation for borrowers affected by COVID-19. Terms of the mortgage unaffected. And what do we mean by this? Of course, you've already had a chance to hopefully review the letter. And this is just basically saying that Dear Lender Letter 2020-06 only applies to loss mitigation options with regards to the COVID-19 national emergency forbearance. In addition, lenders must comply with all provisions of the CARES Act. And once a COVID-19 forbearance expires and you as a lender begin enforcing your contractual rights, HUD goes back to requiring standard time frames for processing foreclosures. With regards to reporting to consumer reporting agencies of borrowers impacted by COVID-19 national emergency, borrowers granted a COVID-19 forbearance are not considered delinquent for purposes of credit reporting. HUD requires servicers to comply with credit reporting requirements of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. However, HUD encourages servicers to consider the impacts of the COVID-19 national emergency on borrowers' financial situation and any flexibilities a servicer may have under the Fair Credit Reporting Act when taking any negative credit reporting actions. Next slide, please. Okay, so you process borrower through the loss mitigation advance, or they've qualified for forbearance, so they're under either a forbearance or a loss mitigation advance. And now we will need to get updated reporting on those particular borrowers. So as you can see on the slide here, we have made an amendment to the Section 184A servicing report requirements. We've added 9 data fields that will cover the updates on those borrowers impacted by COVID-19, as you can see there. Beginning next Monday, June 8th, and on a weekly basis thereafter, there will be a reporting requirement, as outlined in this Dear Lender Letter 2020-06, there will be a reporting requirement for those impacted by COVID-19. Again, that will be a weekly reporting requirement. Those reports will be submitted to 184servicing@HUD.gov beginning Monday, June 8th, and every week thereafter on Monday. This doesn't change the existing servicing report requirement that is due by the 5th business day of each month. So that does not impact that. Those will still continue, lenders will still continue to submit the Section 184, 184A servicing report to HUD by the 5th business day of each month for their entire portfolio. But this is an amendment and an addition for a weekly reporting requirement for COVID-19 impacted borrowers who are either under forbearance or are found to be eligible for the loss mitigation advance. This, a template for this report will be emailed out to the attendees as well as will be posted on to Code Talk. Next slide, please. Let's briefly talk about communicating this forbearance information to borrowers. Lenders should send communication to all Section 184 and 184A borrowers, letting them know that this forbearance is available to them if needed. Again, ONAP, during periodic monitorings of lenders, will be monitoring these outreach efforts. Next slide, please. Temporary moratorium on evictions. Again, under this Dear Lender Letter, the moratorium on evictions were extended out to July 24th, 2020. And just to point out, the rental properties held by a tribe or TDH that is encumbered by a Section 184 guaranteed loan is subject to the temporary moratorium on eviction under the CARES Act. Some specifics to note. A tribe or TDH may not issue a notice to vacate until after July 24th, 2020, and they must provide the tenant with a 30-day notice to vacate after the expiration of the eviction moratorium on July 24th, 2020. Next slide, please. The extension and clarification of the foreclosure moratorium. This Dear Lender Letter extends the moratorium on foreclosures previously authorized by HUD on March 20th, extending it out until June 30th, 2020, with the exception of vacant or abandoned properties. Next slide, please. Dear Lender Letter 2020-06 also extends the flexibilities for the verification of employment, appraisal reviews, and IRS tax transcripts that were previously issued in Dear Lender Letter 2020-05, and these have been extended to June 30th, 2020. That completes my presentation on Dear Lender Letter 2020-06. Thank you very much. At this time, we will open it up for questions.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, so much. We do have some questions in our chat, so I do want to review those. First one says, if another 180 days is requested, parentheses, lender must approve, please confirm this means the servicer and not ONAP.
Yes, that does mean the servicer. That is correct.
Okay. The next question is there direction on how to file a claim for reimbursement for a COVID-19 forbearance loss mitigation advance? And I guess we have indicated in this letter some specific requirements of additional documentation for the claim that you would submit. However, in general, you would submit it in the same fashion that you would submit a partial claim. There will be some omissions, and you need to clearly identify that this is a COVID-19 loss mitigation advance so that we are not looking for documents that would not be available. Okay, next question. Can you send these slides out to us?
Definitely. We will be sending the slides out. So, yes, we'll send them out, and we will also post them on Code Talk.
Right. Next question is, how do we determine any previous loss mitigation advances to ensure we do not exceed the life of the loan maximum?
That's a good question. And I would imagine just the history that you have on the borrower would give you that information. Other than that, I'm not quite sure.
I agree with that, Jeff, and that I think you would have some history of partial claims, right? So loss mitigation advance is really a form of a partial claim or synonymous almost with a partial claim. So you would want to look into the history of that particular loan file and see if any partial claims were filed and paid, and then you reduce the available loss mitigation advance by any of those previously paid partial claims. Okay, next question. What address at HUD should the original note and subordinate mortgage deed of trust be sent?
The address at HUD.
Yeah, that's easy. That's 451 7th Street Southwest, room 4108, Washington, D.C., 20410. And it should come to the attention of Jeff Glass or myself, Krista Johnson, and it should be sent by a delivery service, FedEx, or something of that nature.
We've been out of the office so long, I forgot the address, Krista.
Something you don't use every day, is it?
Right.
All right. Let me give you another one then, Jeff. What are the key differences between the Section 184 and the Section 184A mortgages? So I'm not sure that we can address the mortgages here, but we can talk about the differences with the loss mitigation advance. Jeff?
Right. So the differences with loss mitigation advance, again, is the Department of Hawaiian Homelands has restrictions on subordinate mortgages, and as part of the loss mitigation advance documentation for Section 184, we require a promissory note and a subordinate mortgage to secure the loss mitigation advance made out to the Secretary of HUD. So with that restriction on subordinate mortgages by the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, we're not allowed to have a subordinate mortgage be a part of that documentation if we were to do if a loss mitigation advance was to be done for Section 184A borrower. So that is the main difference with the loss mitigation advance. The requirement or the not being able to file or record a subordinate mortgage. But all of the other documentation is pretty much the same. It's just that that subordinate mortgage cannot be recorded. So that's a document that would not be required for Section 184A borrower. Hope that answers the question.
You did. Thank you so much, Jeff. Next question is, does the forbearance apply to the tribes or the housing authorities for COVID? And that answer would be yes. If a tribe holds a Section 184A or 184 or 184 mortgage, they could ask for a forbearance if they're not receiving any rents. They certainly could. Next question is, to clarify, would the servicers need to submit a claim for reimbursement for a LMA similar to a partial claim? If so, are there any differences that need to be handled for this part?
So right now, as far as a partial claim, it would not be similar to prior submission of request for partial claim, because remember that under the COVID-19 national emergency, a borrower is eligible as long as their payment was current as of February 1st, 2020, and they weren't 30 days past due at that time. The property is owner occupied, and they indicate that they can make their mortgage payments going forward. Those are all the requirements. That's the only requirement for the loss mitigation advance under COVID-19. So it is different. And with that, you would, whatever that amount is determined to be, whatever that amount is of the forbearance payments, because it's the only thing that can be included in that loss mitigation advance is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Those payments, whatever they total up to be, those payments that were suspended or forbeared, we total it up. That will be the amount of the loss mitigation advance, with only requiring those eligibility requirements that I mentioned. So that's the only requirements for it. A note would be drawn up, a mortgage or deed of trust would be drawn up, and the process described that I've described and that's outlined in the Dear Lender letter would be what's required to implement a loss mitigation advance. So I hope that's answering the question. It's different from a partial claim because this is an advance on the guarantee, and that mortgage would then be payable. There would be no payments required. It would just be payable upon the sale or sale of the property. So if the property is sold, then that lien will be taken care of. So it would be a second lien that would stay on the property, but there are not payments required. However, if the borrower wanted to make payments, they are free to make payments, but there are no payments required. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. In addition, the subordinate mortgage to HUD would be due when the property was sold, or if the property was refinanced. At that time, it would have to be rolled into the refinance or paid off at that time. So, in a nutshell, you're going to submit it in similar to a partial claim. There's going to be documentation that's not required. There's going to be additional documentation in the form of copies of the note and the deed of trust and those items that you're going to need to send in. So, but primarily it's going to be very similar to the partial claim. Okay, the next question is, if a borrower does a COVID deferral, will this have an effect on future 184 loan approvals? And we do anticipate putting out some guidance on what the minimum required, payments after the loss mitigation advance is issued, how long the borrower will need to make timely payments before they'll be eligible for another 184 loan. But currently that will not have a negative impact on them in general. We will not look at this as late payments, et cetera, but we want to be sure that they, during this time, that they have actually recovered payments or, jobs back on, they're all set receiving their income. So we want to be sure of that because we don't want to put them in a bad position to where they end up going into foreclosure. We want them to be totally recovered. Next question, it says, how should a borrower indicate they have the ability to resume payments? In writing or verbally or what?
Either or, I think, depending on the communication, as long as they indicate it to you, the lender, that they are able to make payments going forward, that is sufficient. If I'm missing something on that, Krista, please let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on target there, Jeff. This particular flexibilities that are issued for through the CARES Act basically allow the borrower to attest. So we are going to accept their word on it. You're going to have to document your file as you might with any other file, as you do with all your other servicing, such and such a date. I spoke with the borrower, whichever borrower it was. They've indicated they have, resumed full income and are ready to resume full payments on the loan. All right, let's see the next one. It says, how do we verify a property is owner-occupied? Verbal statement or inspection? Question mark. And, I'd like to go ahead and answer that. So, all of our properties must be owner-occupied. So we're going to require the borrower to attest that it's owner-occupied because it's a requirement for a Section 184 loan. There are no options for that. The only exception is that whether a loan is made to a tribe to help bring housing to their reservation. And so that is the exception, that we do allow those properties to be rented by the tribe. But other than that, this program is owner-occupied only. Okay, next question. I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'm going to reach out to the sender and possibly get a clarification and send an answer to that. This next one says, we are fairly new to FHA 184. How do we submit a partial claim? Is there a website or is it a paper submission? So it is a paper process at this time, and if you want to shoot me an email, then I'm happy to connect you with a person here on OLG staff that can help you with that process. Or actually, Jeff, you can shoot Jeff an email too, Jeffrey B. Glass at HUD.gov or Krista M. Johnson at HUD.gov.
Don't forget the dots between the names.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. It's Jeffrey.B. Glass at HUD.gov. Krista.M.Johnson.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Okay, it says, next question is, are monthly PMI advances not eligible to be included in the loss mitigation advance calculation? If you should go ahead and include those in your loss mitigation advance, but you're going to have to provide documentation of the payment of those. Next question. Does ONEP not have a list of previously paid advance previous advances paid. We are thinking for newly serviced loans where the previous servicer history may not be available. And your statement would be correct. We do not have a list of previously advanced partial claims. We do have some, but we're a manual process and we are not automated, and so it takes a lot of research for us to get to that point. All right, the next one is for you, Jeff. Oh, this was an easy one. Maybe it's not an easy one. It's, can you please repeat the address to send a partial claim?
Okay.
You want me to do that?
I've got it here, 451 7th Street Southwest. That's 451 7th Street Southwest, room 4108, Washington, D.C., 20401, to the attention of Jeff Glass.
Okay, I think the zip code is 20410. Not 01.
Thank you.
20410.
Thank you.
Okay, next one is, can you confirm if we continue to report the same electronic default reporting codes as we do under FHA guidance? And the answer to that is no. We do not use those codes. All right. Next question. LMAs will be paid prior to receipt by ONAP of recorded mortgage, correct? Then 6 months to deliver recorded document. Do tribal trust properties require a new certified TSR also?
Oh, I think you're right on that. They will be paid out. But as far as requiring a new TSR, well, it does have to be submitted to, because the lien position has to be verified. So you'll be correct in that.
Yeah. So we will be looking for the executed documents in the claim package, in the loss mitigation advance package that you send in. We will also be looking for documentation that you have sent the document off for recordation. And if we will be looking for the actual recorded document. So the same thing would be in the tribal trust loans. All right, the next one is, if there is a promissory note and a second mortgage, does that mean the borrowers have to pay this back when they sell the home or refinance? Is this a zero interest? And are the terms 15, 20, or 30 years?
So it would be due when it was sold or refinanced. And there's, I believe it is zero interest. And there are no repayment terms. It's just due at sale or refinance.
That's right. All right, next question. What do you consider the date of first default, and why did you use the example from 2017?
So the date of first default is the date that a borrower initially had a partial claim or loss mitigation advance, or entered into the date of default related to an initial loss mitigation advance or partial claim. So that's why you would have to know that borrower's history to know if there had been any prior partial claims or loss mitigation advances. And at the time that borrower entered into at the time that the borrower first defaulted, that would be the default date for the calculation. Was there a second part to that question? I thought there was.
It was, why did we use an example from 2017?
Oh, right. Well, the example from 2017, because I believe that was because there may not have been any partial claims done recently. I think those were some partial claims. There may have been some things we've done maybe a couple of years ago. There haven't been any recent partial claims under the Section 184 program. That may have been why we used it.
Exactly. We wanted to provide an opportunity for you to see how to do the calculation if there had been a previous advance. So we just picked a date that might have been previous. And with respect to if there weren't any previous, then it would be this time the date that the borrower attested to the fact that they were affected by COVID-19 is the date that you would use for the unpaid principal balance, and consider that to be the date of default with respect to the calculation. I understand there's no default because we're not considering them to be in default, but if they have attested that they have been affected, that would be the date that you would use. Okay. Next question is, do you file a claim through FHA Connection website? And the answer is no, we're not FHA, we're ONEP, and we do not use FHA Connection. So you submit a manual, a loan, and claim application. And if you have any questions, please email Jeff, and he will help you through that process. Okay, let's see. All right, the next question, Jeff, for you is, in what form do you want a borrower to attest to their COVID-related financial difficulty? Is a verbal statement acceptable? If not, what?
Yes, a verbal statement is acceptable. You as the servicer or lender would just have to document that in your file. So a verbal attestation is acceptable.
That's right. Okay, next question is, let's see, would a COVID-19 forbearance lien be considered as cash out or no cash out when refinancing? Quite frankly, as I indicated previously, we are working on that next Dear Lender letter that will talk about what happens with respect to future loans. So that will be coming. All right, looks like my final question at this point is, are individuals in a single closed loan who are in the construction stage able to request a forbearance? The home would not be currently occupied. Yeah, so, you know, we are offering flexibilities to borrowers that are affected by the COVID-19. And as you know, in a single closed loan scenario, the borrower begins to make payments on the mortgage prior to the house being finished. They're not construction loans, so there's no second closing. It all happens at one time. So if they, too, are affected by COVID-19, they certainly would be able to ask for forbearance. That would not stop the construction of the house. And, again, it would be clearly documented already that the property was under construction, and then upon completion, we would be looking for the borrower to occupy. Like maybe another question has come in. It says, on a construction loan and forbearance, can we still make disbursements to the contractor? That would be absolutely correct. We want that house to continue to be built along with the plan. So you would continue to go through construction. You may experience some construction delays, but hopefully not. And so the house would be built, and the borrower would move in, and they would still be in their forbearance. Okay. Are there any other questions? That I don't see any questions in the chat. Do we have any on the line by chance, Chris?
To ask a verbal question, please hit #2 on your telephone keypad. We have no questions on the line.
Thank you so much. Jeff, do you want to have any closing remarks?
No, nothing other than thank you very much for your time today. Again, we appreciate your patience with getting this information out. And again, always feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions or any issues. Just let me know, and I will try to get back with you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, so let me go ahead and just echo what Jeff has said. We appreciate you being on the call, and we're happy to help with any questions that you might have that come up. I do want to emphasize that the reporting requirement is going to be receiving heavy oversight, as you know, from ONAP, from HUD, from Congress. Lots of people are interested in how this CARES Act is implemented. So please, if you have any questions about submitting your report on a weekly basis, please get in contact with us so we can assist you, so we don't have to show you as delinquent in your reporting. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Stay safe out there, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.